Near the beginning of yesterday's meta-analysis video, which yes, I'm aware it was a 51-minute long meta-analysis video. That's why I didn't include this portion of it inside the meta-analysis. It would have been way too long, but it was already long enough, you know what I mean? But I had briefly mentioned about a playstyle that I think could help a lot of players out when it comes to not only just climbing on this patch in particular, but also just how to approach TFT in general, how to play the game, and how to just not only like if you try this playstyle out, it'll also help broaden your understanding about TFT and just how to approach the game in general. Admittedly, I will say that this is not something that you can implement into every single one of your games, but it's something that you can play maybe like half the time. I would say roughly half the time. And actually, it's actually hard forceable a little bit because of legends. But let's just stop dilly-dallying and just get on to the video. So let's talk about it. So the playstyle, I don't have a name for it. I just call it RTF, Reroll Tempo Flex. I think it sounds cool. But it's very, very simply put, you angle a strong reroll board early, and then with that generated tempo, you can decide to either flex or stay within that reroll comp. So let's talk a little bit about why it works, how it works, and how we can really implement it into our games. And we'll go over a couple lines as to how it works later on in the video. But just to give you guys a broader understanding as to how it works, your early game goals, you want to preserve as much HP as possible. 5 win streaks is the goal. You want to generate a lot of economy with the 5 streak, but also just, you know, you have 100 HP. You have a lot of room to work with. And using that a lot of, you know, that HP advantage, you're able to generate opportunity. And we'll talk a little bit about more what that means later down the video. Your mid-game goals, you want to do a couple of 3-2 roll downs. What I mean by this is that you don't want to zero out, but 3-2 roll downs are your best friend in this particular playstyle. You do want to really hard stabilize your board for stage 3, and then you want to try to generate a 10 win streak. That is the ultimate goal. And again, you want to generate as much of an HP advantage as you can to try to nab those top 4s and actually even play for first depending on your spot. So the late game goals is that okay, your late game, sorry, this is a motorcycle outside. Your late game goals, you want to have 4-1 really solid direction. You want to make sure that by 4-1 you know what you're doing. Like you're like, okay, this is my board, this is what I'm playing for the rest of the game. That way you don't get dizzy, right? That becomes a very big problem with a lot of players where whenever they play flex, they get dizzy. They don't know what their board's supposed to look like. They don't know what to do because they're like, oh, I'm hitting this unit, that unit, XYZ unit, and like it could play this comp, but it could also be this comp, and you get dizzy, get confused, right? 4-1, you want to generate solid direction. You know what your game plan is, right? This way, by generating a solid direction, you are better off than people who are just already getting dizzy. And believe me, people in like Masters and above are getting dizzy sometimes on the 4-1 roll downs. Myself included, I get dizzy sometimes. But if you're able to generate solid direction, that dizziness is just not a thing anymore. So this is actually a really good way to counteract that. By doing so, having solid direction, you basically guarantee that top 4, both with just because of your HP advantage, but also because you know exactly what you're playing this game, right? And by doing all this stuff, you're basically guaranteed to maybe just, I wouldn't say you're guaranteed to climb LP, but you should have a good time. Like, bot 4 is pretty difficult if you play this playstyle. 6 is usually the worst that it'll end up being. Just so you understand what the requirements are for this playstyle, though, you should have really solid fundamentals. This is something that it's going to take time to develop. It's not something that you can just learn overnight. I mean, if you're, you know, probably like mid-masters, GM, challenger, like this is, you're probably actually doing this already. So this video might not even be that helpful. I mean, maybe it is, maybe it's not, I don't know. Maybe you're doing this just like subconsciously, I don't know. But solid fundamentals, specifically, you really need to understand like how to play your strongest board. You need to have a strong understanding of like the current meta, just understanding what like meta comps are, what are meta lines, what lines you could play that could fit into this playstyle, right? In particular for this video, I am actually helping you guys out so we can talk about those lines, so that's not something you actually have to worry too much about. But understanding your strongest board and scouting is super important, because if, let's say for example, you don't scout at all during the game and suddenly you scout once during stage 4, you realize you're 3-way contested, like that's not good. You're not playing solid TFT, and this playstyle will not help you out. Scouting is super important, and playing your strongest board, these are also really important. And actually, early game positioning is super important as well. I might make a video about this in the future. Let me know if that's something you want to see. But the way that you actually position your units in the early game can drastically affect whether or not you actually get to play this type of playstyle. Specifically understanding how to play against weak side, strong side, as well as understanding how to stack your damage with your carries. how to play around your strongest tank, stuff like that, and like CC disruption and whatever. So let me know if that's something you're interested in. Maybe I'll make a video about it tomorrow. We'll see. Also, just going on with the fundamentals, a deep understanding of lines and outs. This means that like understanding how to play towards your out. That's a very important thing to understand. I did a video on this way back in set 7. I might need to make a new one on it, but that's something you're interested in. Go. I'll link the video in the description if that's something you're interested in. I don't know how well it's aged. I'll rewatch after this actually. We'll see. But understanding how to play different lines, different outs, that's really important. And then also willing to play very few comps. You're basically, I wrote 3 TP, like a 3-trick pony. You should basically be like, hey, these are the 3 comps I'm playing. These are the 3 lines I'm going to be leaning into. What can I play out of this, right? And that's where sort of is the most controversial portion of this strategy, where it's like, realistically, you should be able to play like any comp. Best TFT players can play any comp. And that's actually why this is just, your solid fundamentals are better than hard forcing the strategy 20 out of 20. If you have solid fundamentals and you're able to play every single line, you are better off doing that than just hard forcing the strategy. But what I'm saying is that this strategy should be just something that's within your toolbox, within your toolkit, something that you can pull out. And again, I would say probably within like at least like half your games. Like this is actually something that pops up quite often. But again, not possible every game. And I'm going to be honest, it's kind of boring to play this kind of play style. But I mean, you get a lot of LP, so that's pretty pog. So I mean, hey, take it as you will. If you want to just play for fun, just play every single line, just play TFT as however you want, and just you want to have the most fun out of it, then I don't know if I would recommend this playstyle particularly. But if climbing is your goal, gaining LP is your goal, then this is something that you should consider. I will talk about this real quick. The best legends for this playstyle for this current patch is Ornn. This is because it opens up complete flex, meaning that this is the highest skill ceiling. You won't be playing this playstyle every single time, but if you're taking the Ornn legend, you're able to play around, okay, maybe I play into this RTF playstyle, or maybe I just, just play just regular TFT, just flex TFT, strongest board, solid fundamentals, good shit, right? That's fine as well. Caitlyn, you can actually take if you want to take Stars Are Born, and you can hard force the strategy 20 out of 20. I will say this though, is that son of a bitch. I will say this though, if you are playing Caitlyn and it is something like I don't remember what her silver augment is off the top of my head, but if you're playing the prismatic lobby, the starter kit, this might not be a viable strategy. This is only really like hard forceable if you're playing Caitlyn and you play Stars Are Born. It did get buffed in the current patch. Joe Bookmark did pioneer like a very interesting Caitlyn playstyle. Sub-Zero Arc, who's another YouTuber, actually did a whole video on Caitlyn playstyle that he learned it from Joe Bookmark, but it was his own playstyle. But you get the general gist as to like how to play it. Really good thing to look into. I highly recommend looking into it. But anyways, enough about that. Let's talk a little bit about how we can actually play this with the current lines that are available within this current patch. Now, I will say this though, we are going over 3 different lines, and we're gonna go from the most easiest to the hardest. As in, it's the easiest to see the direction, right, all these comps are going, and then it's gonna get a little more obscure and a little harder to play into, at least in my opinion, but maybe it makes more sense the further we go. Hey, it depends on the person. But anyways, the first one let's talk about is Deadeye Reroll Flex. So this is probably the most obvious out of the 3 that we're going to talk about today. This is just because Action Reroll is already a very, very strong comp, and the way that you play around this and Action Reroll in general is that on 3-2 you roll down, and ideally this is your board on 3-2. I mean, yes, there's a Sejuani on the board, I'm painfully aware, but this could be like a Vi as well, like a Vi 2, V, right? This could be your like 3-2 board. This is very realistic, right? The idea is that you wouldn't be playing into Action unless you already had a very early Action, and then when you're sending it down on 3-2, you're trying to hit this Action 2 pretty early. Obviously, you're not trying to hit every single one of these 2-stars. That's a lot to be asking for, but I mean, you should be hitting at least the Action 2 for sure, and then whatever else upgrades come your way, like you should be picking those up. And then basically the idea is this: you play this board for stage 3, and then you try to figure out, okay, am I gonna be able to play Action Reroll this game, or am I going to be playing into something else, right? And that's where the flex and the angle, you angle reroll and then you play into flex sort of starts to hit, right? Where you're like, okay, this is where the constant scouting comes in. You're trying to figure out, okay, is the other person they're trying to play Action Reroll? Are they trying to play Affiliates instead? Do they have an Action on their board? Does their Action on their board have a Ginsu? Or does it have a Runeans, right? These itemizations, these small things matter that you need to notice because let's say, for example, they're playing an Action, but their Action has a Ginsu on it, right? there's a very high chance that that person is trying to play Velkoz rather than Action Reroll. So Action Reroll is more likely to be within your favor, right? Things to note that when you are playing this playstyle, though, when you're playing this what is it, RTF playstyle, right, is that you don't want to slam items that give you too much direction towards one or the other, right? So for example, really good slams for this playstyle, even though Runaan's is BIS action, that's not something you actually want to be slamming so early on. You actually want to be slamming something like an open bow, right? Open bow instead of the Runaan's, because that will actually leave potentially BT open for your Urgot later on in case you need to pivot out of Action Reroll. It's also very possible that this could become a Ginsu as well. That's really great as well. So things like Death's Blade, Hodge, these are actually really good items to be slamming because these can go on either or. Hodge, not as much, only because Hodge, it's really only good with Idealism, but it's still a decent slam on Action. I know there's a little bit of sort of discourse going on about how you don't want mana generating items, or not a mana generating item, but an item that gives you starting mana on Action because you'll proc his ultimate before the Failure Storm hits. I think that's just a bunch of bogus. Hodge is fine. I don't think it's that bad. I will say though, if you do decide to not end up playing into Action Reroll, by the way, if you don't know what the board looks like, it's just Bing Bop, Sejuani, boop. Yep, something like this. This is usually your 3-2 board, right? This is this very standard Action Reroll board, and you try to 3-star, 3-star. I forgot to make the Action 3-star board. My bad. The other ones, they have the full 3-star boards. But this one, yeah, again, this is your endgame goal for the Action Reroll board, and if you end up having to flex out, that's okay. You play into the Velkoz and the Urgot as well. And this is sort of this is the most straightforward way of like an RTF playstyle, right? Obviously that there are going to be games where you're like, hey, I decided not to play Action Reroll and I'm trying to play into a Velkoz. This is where your fundamentals come in. Like, okay, now let's say, for example, you don't hit the Velkoz. You don't hit a Velkoz too. How do you play from there, right? And that's where your fundamentals start to come in, and I hope they kicked in because think about it. Actually, think about it, right? I'm gonna drink some coffee here. I want you to think, okay, I didn't hit the Velkoz. Who is my other out? With these items. God, I fucking love Dunkin' Coffee. Anyways, do you have your answer yet? The correct answer is Zeri. Very good, or very not good if you didn't get it. But very simply put, drop, and then you just send it here, boom. There you go, and that's the board. So that's just something that you can also play into, and again, this is where your fundamentals really kick in. Obviously, there is a sign on this board. This is a level 8 board. Your level 7 board would probably look somewhere more along the lines of something that looks like, something like that. If I had to guess, something like this is your level 7. Totally fine, totally acceptable. I just play Failure Zeri. That is where your fundamentals should kick in, right? Very good stuff. Again, this is the most obvious example. We're gonna get a bit more obscure as the game goes, the video goes on. Next up, Noxus Reroll. Now, Noxus Reroll is infamously known for being a very, very strong board, and actually, it's one of those boards that you really do want to send it down on 3-2, and you want to 2-star like the majority of these units. Unlike the Action Reroll board, Noxus, you really do want to be hitting like 2-star Darius, 2-star Swain, 2-star Katarina. Everything else is sort of supplementary. If you hit the 2-star Samira, 2-star Cassiopeia, 2-star Kled, good. If you don't, it's fine. The magic number that I've noticed is 3 2-stars. Specifically, Darius has to be one. Darius or Katarina has to be one of those, and they need to have items. Otherwise, whichever one has items needs to be 2-starred, plus like 2 more. That's what I've noticed. I know it's scary to roll down to like 0 on 3-2, but Noxus Reroll in particular, it's actually kind of acceptable. Again, it's only if you are like really lacking on the upgrades, but you're really committed to this Noxus line, right? And typically items, you know, I personally, whenever I play this line, I like to go BT Titans. I know some people are arguing that like, hey, like, I don't like BT Titans. I'm low-key calling out a specific YouTuber. I wonder if he's watching this video, but I know a specific YouTuber likes IE Hodge. I think this is Dookie. I don't think Hodge is, okay, it's not actually Dookie. I like BT Titans better. I do agree on the IE though, but I don't think you actually need Hodge on over this. The reason being is that just Darius 3 ends up having so much HP, and that you actually do prefer having that shield with BT. It's just so much better than having this Hodge. I know it's a little more crit chance with the IE, but IE is definitely bis on Darius, and I know there's an argument being made that Titans is like Okay, I'm just gonna say his name. I'm calling out Sub-Zero real quick. But like, I know he says the Titans is not very good on Darius, or his theory, or rather his argument is that by the time this Darius is getting his first cast off, it only gets like 5, 6, 10 stacks maybe. It doesn't get to fully stack. But late game Darius, you really want it to be, once it stacks up to 25, which will happen. It's usually one of the last units alive. It just dishes out an insane amount of damage. It gets a lot of resistances. It's very, very tanky, and that scales well with the BT and everything. So I think Titans BT is definitely better than IE Hodge. Again, no flame. It's just banter. We're chill. I'm just fucking around. But anyways, yeah. But again, Darius items are like this, and then usually your Katarina items end up being something like a JG Hodge. That's usually the most iconic Katarina itemization, if you will. This is your level 6 board, right? And then your level 7 board usually ends up being something like this, and this is assuming you play into the Darius and the Katarina. Good stuff. Now let's talk a little bit about like, okay, RTF. Like, how do we play Tempo Flex instead if we don't actually end up deciding to play into Noxus? Let's say, for example, some dumb fuck in the lobby has decided to completely hard contest us for Noxus units, right? Don't hold hands. That is the worst way to go about it. You have better options. The first one being, oh, by the way, this is the level 7 board. I don't know why I put this board here before this. But we'll rewind it back, okay? Rewind it back. Chances are you'll go level 7, and this is sort of your board, right? This is sort of your board at 4-1. You scout the lobby. What do you see? You see that there's some dickhead also running Noxus. They took Noxus emblem at 3-2 for whatever reason. And then they just want to hard contest you. Maybe you scout at 4-2 and then they took like total domination. You're like, what the fuck is wrong with you, kid? Can't you scout the lobby? And he just doesn't, right? Happens. People just don't scout sometimes. It just is like that. So how do we pivot out of this board? So this is where things get a bit tricky, right? When was the last time you saw someone pivot out of Noxus? It's not very common, right? Most of the times if someone's playing Noxus, nobody else is touching that shit because they don't want to contest, right? I mean, it's just bad for both of you. So what ends up happening is, well, where is it? First off, you can have this sort of the Noxus Crest variation where, let's say you're playing the Noxus Crest variation and then you need to pivot out because some guy is hard contesting you for Noxus and they're somehow hitting more than you are, even though you've been playing this early on. You can pivot out. You can play into his Lux. This is a very interesting Noxus line. You tech down to 3 Noxus. You play Cassiopeia here instead of like it's usually Talia in the spot, but you actually tech down to Cassiopeia instead, and then you actually play into the Azir Lux. You will have this available to you because again, you are playing Noxus originally, so Cassiopeia carries over. Swain carries over because of the strategist, and yeah, if you're playing this board, actually the Nasus carries over, the Azir carries over. It's actually not that far of a pivot. So this is actually something that you can play if you find yourself in that sort of a situation. Now, if you don't have the Noxus Crest, though, then... Oh, by the way, these are just the stats. This is not a very well planned out video, but this is the stats. It's not bad. I know there's one person who's going to be like, oh, well, what if you exclude, like, Scion stats? Well, I mean, yeah, I'm aware. Like, it's pretty bad. But keep in mind, you should have an insane amount of HP to work with. You should be able to find the Scion pretty easily. It shouldn't be too bad. What I will say, though, and more stats. What I will say, though, is that if you don't have the Noxus Crest, you can pivot into stuff like Urgot. You can actually pivot into a bunch of different lines. The idea is, though, is that if you do decide to pivot out, you need to keep in mind that large pivots require large amounts of money, okay? And this is, again, this is a much harder pivot to pull off because you are playing with some pretty strict itemization. The only units that can really utilize these items very well is Nasus, which is why, again, Nasus actually pops up here because he can actually utilize the Darius items that you were carrying earlier, and Lux carries the Katarina items, Azir is just carrying his Azir items. But if you want to pivot out, you have units like Urgot. It is so noisy today. I don't know why. You have units like Urgot, but you also have units like Gwen, which are actually available to you. Which, I know Gwen looks a little suspicious here, but hear me out. The idea being is that you can actually do JG Titans BT, and this is not the best in terms of itemization, but if you really, really are struggling and you need that pivot, this is definitely available to you as well. I should also mention these pivots should be happening probably at level 8, specifically for the Noxus line. Reason being is that level 7, even if your level 7 board is this, it's still very strong. You have a strong board. You might start bleeding out a little bit at the beginning of stage 4, but you should be able to go level 8 pretty comfortably and then slowly pivot out of the Noxus line into something that is a bit more familiar, again, with the Gwen, and you're again looking for JG, BT, or sorry, Titans BT. This is totally fine. And then you slowly tech off. Let's say you tech off the first 3 Noxus units. You probably tech off Uno, Dos, Trace, right? And then you're probably looking at, I mean, it's probably the Darius as well. Yeah. And then you probably find something like this, and you find something like this, and then you can tech down. Eventually, you're probably keeping this Kled. This is the only thing that's sticking around, which is pretty unfortunate. But then you just keep throwing in more units. Play whatever you find, play whatever you hit, and eventually you can probably flesh out a board that is semi-decent. You actually might be able to justify keeping this in here for the Juggernaut. That's actually fine as well. Probably need to find a replacement, but then you can just, just keep flexing out the units here, play whatever in the backline. I mean, this is a very high roll position. This should not happen. What's more realistic? Fucking Deadeye, I guess. Bing bop. Like, like you have options available to you. Like you have a lot of different things that you can play around. So flex around what you hit, see what you find. Noxus is a lot harder though. I will say this is a much more difficult tempo flex line, and I don't think this will happen too often within your games. The higher you climb, the lower elo you are, the more you might have to struggle trying to find this shit, because you might get contested because people don't scout in lower elo. But the higher you go, the less likely this becomes a problem. Finally, let's talk a bit about Velkoz Reroll Flex. This is the hardest one, if Noxus was not hard enough already. This is the hardest one, in my opinion. The only reason being is that I don't like AP Flex very much. It's my least favorite line to play, which is very surprising, because at the beginning of Set 9, I used to love AP Flex, and now here we are. I fucking hate AP Flex, and I think that's maybe because Kais is kind of in the gutter right now, so that might be why. I mean, she's not even that bad, but she's kind of bad. But anyways, we'll talk a little bit about this line and how it works. So basically, your 3-2 board should look something like this. You roll down on 3-2, and you try to find the Cast 2, Tarek 2, Swain 2, Teemo 2, Velkoz 2, Malzahar 2, and you are angling for a Velkoz reroll board. The idea being is that if you can manage to hit some semblance of this board, you are going to be able to streak most of stage 3. I will say though, it's a little weaker compared to boards like Noxus reroll. It's weaker to Deadeye reroll, depending on the way you position. Notice Velkoz is in the middle here, not on the sides. This is for 2 reasons. One, in case there's action on players, but also the way that Velkoz's spell works. It used to be that you would position him in C1, and then he would shoot his little sperm ball, whatever it is, and then it would explode, but you'd waste a little bit of value because one of them would shoot out in this direction. People have found out that if people are also clumping their front line as well, what ends up happening is that as long as you position Velkoz within the middle here, let's do like a full board real quick, what you can end up seeing, I'm just gonna put some real fake units on the board right now, is that if you position him, let's say here, he will auto the Poppy and then explode, hitting both the front line here, and it's actually really, really good. I don't know if this is for certain or not, but from what I've experienced, it seems like Velkoz's AI is surprisingly really smart. So like he will almost always try to target his shot to hit as many units as possible, even after it splits. I can't confirm that, but with my own eyes, I'm like, damn, this guy's kind of smart. I don't know if that's like an AI thing or if he's just naturally smart. I mean, that would fit with his lore. Like maybe it's just a lore buff. I don't fucking know. But yeah, anyways, so the idea is, again, you try 3-star the Velkoz, you roll at 7. Really, really great. Unfortunately, this line does require a Sork Spat if you decide to reroll for Velkoz, which can be difficult to find at times. Spatulas are a bit rare, so if you don't end up getting the Spatula, you do end up playing into Vertical Sorks instead, and you play for the Lux 2, the RE2. This is your ultimate win condition. This is also why I don't really like Sorcerers in general, because RE is a very highly contested unit. If you're the lucky dog who hits RE2, congratulations, you are in a very, very good spot compared to everybody else. But what I will say though is that if you don't manage to find a Sork Crest very soon, you do have another out as well, which is actually this 4 Sork 3-star Karma board. I did talk about this board in the meta-analysis within the stats. It's buried quite deep in the stats, but it's a very strong board according to the stats. I have not seen this board once. I found it in the Explorer tab. It looks very strong. Very fucking strong. Hard to hit. You might also notice Demacia Crest. So if you hit a Demacia Crest at 3-2, you might even consider trying to play into this line instead. Or maybe you find it at 4-2, or maybe you find like you have a spat, but you find Demacia Spat instead of like a Sork Spat. This is something you could consider leaning into. The idea is that Karma 3, Tarek 3, you roll for these 2, and you play for the Lux 2. 6 Invokers is not very reliable. It's a very high roll board to hit, especially if you're trying to find that Karma 3 to try to win out. So I actually think the popularity of Vertical Invokers is actually going to go down as the patch continues. So this board will actually become more prevalent as the patch goes on. If you notice, people are playing Invokers as well, though. You are kind of stuck playing into this vertical Sork line. It kind of sucks. That's kind of the only out that I can personally see. If you do find a different level of an out, please let me know. I'm sure there's some way to make Kaisa work. It's just that I didn't really consider her as an option in the current patch because she's just not very good. It's very possible you could also probably try to flex into Gwen as well and play like a Gwen Lux board. Not really sure how that would work out, but I mean, I can kind of see it. But yeah, definitely something to consider. Again, this is probably the hardest one. It's probably, again, the hardest one only because Kai'Sa is really not that great at the moment. If like Kai'Sa 2 with like 2 challengers was like a strong unit, this board is like a lot more, has a little more options to play with, if you will, right? But unfortunately, based off the current patch that we're on, this is what we are left with. Anyways, that's basically it for this video. I hope this was helpful. Oh, this is just the Karma 3 stats with 4 Sork, by the way. Really cool. 2.59. That's kind of crazy, no? 83% top 4 rate. Like, please try this line. I'm going to be trying this line too if I ever find it. It seems really, really good. By the way, just to further prove my point, I did this in the meta-analysis. Might as well just do it here. Look, 6 Invoker Karma. Ooh, 3.23. Ugh. 4 Sorcerer Karma. Giga Chad. Anyways, that's about it. Take care, guys. I hope this video was helpful. Let me know if you try to play into this RTF playstyle. Let me know if it's something that is new to you, you're excited to try it out. If it sounds like you wasted like half an hour listening to me ramble about this because you're like, I didn't learn jack shit, suck my dick. I didn't ask you to be here. You chose to be here. You did this to yourself, fucker. Yeah. I'm just kidding, by the way. Please don't dislike the video. That hurts me deeply, like deep down in the soul. Anyways, I'm rambling. I'm going. Bye-bye. Oh, I'm streaming in a bit. I'm streaming in like a little over an hour. Hopefully I get this video out before then. If not, this is very awkward. And I will see you guys later. Bye-bye. Happy climbing. Take care now. Bye-bye.